Welcome to this rapid revision video asking the question, how was cholera defeated? This is one of the biggest things that happened in public health in the 19th century in Britain, so it's important to know about it. What was cholera? Cholera was a deadly disease. It originated in India and was brought back aboard trading ships entering British ports from the Empire, which Britain had by now built up in the time of the Industrial Revolution. Cholera was often fatal, and it provided a very undignified and painful death. This is going to get a bit yucky, so I'll warn you. First, the victims suffered severe, often explosive diarrhea. They also suffered from vomiting. This caused terrible dehydration, as the victim lost fluids through vomiting and diarrhea. Then the victim would suffer agonizing cramps and painful joints. Their faces would become shrunken and pale as the dehydration worsened until the victim fell into a coma and eventually died. It usually killed in a matter of days. It could occasionally kill in hours. The illustration at the top is an artist's impression of a healthy young woman. And here the same artist presents what she might look like suffering from cholera. So as you can see, it would be a pretty frightening way to go. Many cities were terribly affected by this disease, including Newcastle, Exeter and Liverpool, but London was one of the worst hit, and much of what we're going to look at today will focus on the cholera outbreaks in London. Most people in power thought that it was caused by bad smells or miasma. It wasn't. It was caused by the sewage getting into drinking water. Bearing this in mind, it is hardly surprising that it spread, given the fact that people will use the same water to wash sewage away as they use to drink and wash and do their laundry. Here are the deadly statistics. Source 4 shows cholera statistics for the main 19th century epidemics, in brackets showing the deaths in London. In 1831 to 32, approximately 32,000 people died from cholera, of whom 6,536 were in London. 1848, that climbs to 62,000 nationally, with 14,137 in London. 1853 to 54, around 20,000 deaths, but the vast majority of those were in London. And then next we got 14,000 deaths, with around a third of those being in London too. So we can see that the cholera epidemics are getting less severe towards the end, but they're still incredibly significant. Here we got source 5. Politician Edwin Chadwick is describing here the condition of the poor in 1842 in his book describing the sanitary condition of the poor. They merely pass dirty linen or cloth through very dirty water. The smell of the linen itself when so washed is very offensive and must have injurious or bad effect upon the health of the occupants. The filth of their dwellings is offensive, and so is their personal filth. So Chadwick isn't just having a go at the poor here for not living very hygienically, he's actually got some sympathy. But what he identifies here is the smell. You might think by reading this source that he is blaming the water for the disease, because it mentions dirty water, but he is not. He thinks it is the smell of that dirty water and anything that comes into contact with it which is causing the disease. So close, but so far. Attitudes to what was believed caused cholera began to change in 1854 with the Broad Street cholera epidemic, but the ideas put forward did not catch on very quickly. Northern doctor John Snow had moved to Soho in London, and there had been an outbreak of cholera in that area of the city. He had an idea. He believed that it wasn't just dirt or the bad air and miasma that caused the disease, it must be something more centralised like the water. His theory went that most of the deaths were occurring around a specific pump, but they weren't occurring near to other nearby pumps. He simply theorised that these people must be breathing the same air, and so therefore if it was miasma, everyone should be getting sick. But only the people around the Broad Street pump were getting sick. This was his method. He produced this map. We can see the Broad Street pump in the middle. What he did is he interviewed people in the houses nearby, and he marked on all the cholera deaths. And you can see that there is a concentration of infections around the Broad Street pump. But he also noticed certain anomalies which didn't fit the pattern. For example, this brewery had no deaths, but he worked out that the workers there only drank the beer, which, being boiled in its production and containing alcohol, killed the cholera. He also found the case of one woman back in Hampstead, 4.5 miles away. She had died, but it was also clear that she was having a daily bottle of water being brought up from the Broad Street pump. Apparently the water tasted pleasant and sweet. We don't really want to think about what was in the water that might have been causing that. More nearby pumps, like Marlborough Mews pump here, had few deaths nearby. Although where there were deaths, it turned out that people had got their water from the Broad Street pump, preferring the taste. So what did Dr. John Snow prove through this? The first stage in solving cholera was identifying the cause, and Dr. John Snow has that honour, not that everyone believed him at the time. Dr. John Snow was the first man to correctly identify that cholera was caused by dirty water. In 1854, he noticed that at Broad Street in London there was a deadly cholera outbreak centred on the Broad Street pump. This pump was popular for its reputation of taste and quality. He noticed that the people who drank the water often became ill and died, and that the workers at the nearby brewery, who only drank the beer, survived. Snow demonstrated this on a map on which he marked where cholera deaths occurred, and he interviewed local people. He wrote up his findings, but he was ignored. So then he personally removed the handle from the pump and the outbreak stopped. It later turned out that an underground cesspit full of sewage was leaking into the pump. After his death, Louis Pasteur's germ theory demonstrated why John Snow's idea was correct. So although he was right, and although we now know why he was right, Dr. John Snow was unfortunately unable to convince the people in power. As I've mentioned, it was Louis Pasteur who helped prove John Snow right. Pasteur will have his own rapid revision video, but in brief, in the 1860s a French scientist called Louis Pasteur proved that bacteria and germs in water could cause beer and wine to go bad. He and others then put forward germ theory. This stated that bacteria, including bacteria in water, was a cause of disease. Through experiments he proved his theory correct, and it is still believed to be correct today. People now believe that cholera was a disease from dirty water, but sadly Dr. John Snow died before his ideas were accepted. We'll have a more detailed look at Pasteur at another time, but for now we'll look at the second solution to the cholera. Solution 2 is Edwin Chadwick, who we've already mentioned with the source earlier. Edwin Chadwick was a politician. To begin with, he believed that the government shouldn't interfere with ordinary people's lives, but his investigations into the living conditions of the poor especially changed his mind. In 1842, he visited working class populations and wrote a report called The Sanitary Conditions of the Labouring Population. In this, he argued that disease was caused or made worse by filth and dirt. He argued that poor people lived in terribly overcrowded and poor quality houses. He also argued that these conditions caused disease because of the smells that they caused. Chadwick firmly believed in the miasma theory. Chadwick didn't believe that you could force people to make changes for health reasons, only that you could recommend that they change things. We'll look at the laws passed as a result of these findings at another time, but we can see that politicians like Edwin Chadwick are some of the ones who begin to bring in reforms and make things better. Solution 3 comes courtesy of Joseph Bazalgette. Joseph Bazalgette was an amazing engineer. How else did he get that moustache? London still owes him a great debt of gratitude for his work. After the Great Stink of 1858, in which the Thames partially dried up and the accumulated sewage caused an absolutely horrific smell throughout the city, the Metropolitan Board of Works, which was the board in charge of building products in London, decided to commission Joseph Bazalgette to build a brand new sewer system to solve the stink and make sure it never returned. Bazalgette's huge new sewers were mostly completed by 1865, and they carried waste safely away from the city and kept the river flowing quickly and cleanly. He also made the sewers big enough to cope if London grew even bigger, which of course it did. Bazalgette's sewers not only solved the stink, but they did a lot to prevent the cholera ever returning too. This was because the sewers kept the sewage away from the drinking water. It kept it separate. Even though Bazalgette didn't actually realise that this was what was causing the cholera. He thought he was solving the stink. Here we can see a picture of his massive sewers under construction. Bazalgette set out to solve the stink. He set out to solve the miasma, and he did so. But in doing so, he managed to clean up the water too, and that is what actually stopped the cholera. As this newspaper cutting shows us, the last London cholera outbreak was declared over by the end of 1866, shortly before the last of Bazalgette's sewers became fully operational. Since the first outbreaks in the 1830s, people's understanding of disease had improved dramatically. In 1854, Dr. John Snow proved that cholera was carried in the water, but he was not widely believed at the time. In 1861, Louis Pasteur published his germ theory, linking germs to disease. Between 1865 and 1867, Joseph Bazalgette's sewers were completed and then kept London's water much cleaner. Our final points then. Cholera was a deadly infectious disease that killed thousands of people in a series of 19th century epidemics. Cholera was caused by contaminated water, but at the time most people were convinced it was caused by miasma or bad air. Dr. John Snow demonstrated that it was spread by water during the 1854 Broad Street cholera epidemic, but he was not widely believed in his lifetime. Louis Pasteur's germ theory later proved Snow right. Edwin Chadwick introduced reports that influenced policy towards dealing with cholera, but he was convinced too that the cause was miasma. And Joseph Bazalgette's sewers were designed to prevent the miasma, but luckily for London, they actually helped clean up the water, helping end the cholera too. So it worked in the end. That's the end of this rapid revision video. I hope it's giving you everything that you need and you found it useful. And if it has, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. But for now, I'll say good health.